We've talked a couple of times in this course about analyzers, so let's go into a little bit more depth about them and how they can help you control how your text fields are searched. So something new in Elasticsearch 6 is that you need to make a decision every time you have a field that contains textual information. You can define it as one of two types, and that determines whether or not your text fields are searched as an exact match or if they're analyzed, meaning that they can be partial matches that are ranked by relevance. Now, if you do want a text field to be an exact match only, you use what's called a keyword type when you're defining your mapping for your index. And that will suppress analyzing on that text field. It will only allow exact matches on a keyword field. So by defining a keyword mapping on a text field, that means the only return that you're going to get on a search on that field will be an exact match, case sensitive and all, on what's in that field. Now, if you do want more partial matches, then you need to choose the text type matching instead. And that will allow what we call analyzers to run on that field. Now, you can specify what analyzers specifically you want to run on that field if you are using a text type. And there are different analyzers for specific languages, for example. And they can do things like make your results for search case insensitive. It can handle stemming, for example, dropping the ing or the ed or the s suffixes on your words and making those all equivalent from a search standpoint. It can remove stop words like, it and the. It can even apply synonyms and have those treated equally in a search. Also, in an analyzed field, a search with multiple terms doesn't need to match all of them. If you have just one of those terms match what's in a text field, it will come back as a potential result, maybe with a lower relevance score, however. So let's dive in and see how this all works. It's best illustrated with an example. So let's just mess around with analyzers and some searches to kind of illustrate the point of how false text search works and how you can modify things using your mappings and your analyzer settings to get the results that you really want. It's important to understand because, again, you need to set up these mappers before you index any data, so it's stuff you have to think about up front. Let's start by just doing a search for Star Trek out of the data that we've already indexed for movies. So let's do something like this, curl-xget 127.0.0.1:9200/movies, movie, index and type, _search with pretty results. Following search body for JSON request, open curly bracket. Let's do a query where we're going to do a match of the title Star Trek. And just close off those curly brackets. And let's see what we got back. So let's scroll back up here. So you can see that I got some results here. We got back Star Wars as the top result. That's a little bit interesting, isn't it? Followed by Star Trek Beyond. So why did I get Star Wars for a search for Star Trek? Now, in fact, Star Wars came back with a higher relevance than Star Trek. How is that even possible when I was searching for Star Trek explicitly? Well, this is as good of a time as any to talk about an issue where if you have too many shards and not enough documents, things don't really work the way you would expect. So the problem is that, in practice, the inverse document frequency is only computed per shard. Okay, so what probably happened here is that Star Wars is stored on one shard and Star Trek is stored on a different shard. They both have different inverse document frequency scores for the term star, which ended up giving Star Wars a higher boost than it would have if everything was into one shard. Now, in practice, this won't really be a big issue if you have a large enough corpus of documents in your Elasticsearch cluster. Another potential workaround would be to set up only one shard on small data sets like this. But bottom line is, don't get too hung up on this right now. The point that I'm trying to make, though, is that even though I searched for Star Trek, I got back Star Trek and Star Wars because both contain the term star. So they are both considered legitimate responses to this search query. Maybe that's what you want, maybe it's not what you want, but you have to remember that that's how analyzers work. They're going to try to give you back anything that even remotely matches what you're searching for. And it will try to give it back to you in relevance order, and sometimes it gets it right. And as we've seen here, sometimes it doesn't get it right. So if that's behavior you're willing to live with, then that's cool. If not, then you need to think about how you structure your queries and how you analyze your data when you're indexing it. Okay, let's look at another example here. Curl-xget 127.0.0.1:9200/movies, movie, and we will search for the following. Let's look for a genre of sci and see if that actually works. We're actually going to do a phrase match here. So you would think that only a search query of sci-fi would even work. But in fact, it gave me back sci-fi movies, even though I only said sci and I wanted a phrase search. Again, it's because the default analyzer is being used for the genre field. So even though I'm saying match phrase, it's splitting those up into individual search terms in the inverted index. So it doesn't matter. You know, it's seeing that even though I'm trying to search for the phrase sci, sci itself is being treated as a phrase, and that itself is being used as part of a search term search. So because the phrase, quote unquote, sci exists within sci-fi, these are all coming back as valid responses, all the sci-fi movies. All right, so again, even if you're saying match phrase, that's not the same thing as saying an exact match for the field. If what you really want is an exact match, you need to disable analyzers on that field. So let's do that. Let's start by blowing away this whole index and just starting over, okay? So curl-x delete 127.0.0.1 9200/movies. Again, you cannot remap things after they've been indexed. So if you do need to change your mapping, this is what you have to do, unfortunately. You have to blow it away and start over. So now that we've blown away the movies index, let's define a new mapping for it. We can do that thusly. Curl-x put 127.0.0.1:9200/movies-d single quote open curly bracket. We're going to define a mappings for this index, specifically for the movie type, with the following properties. All right, so as before, we'll define the movie ID as a type of integer. And the year will remain of type date. And now things get a little bit different. So we're going to take the genre field and define that as a type of keyword. So by defining that as a keyword type, that means that we must have an exact match on the genre field. So the word sci will no longer match against the genre sci-fi. Only a search for sci-fi with a capital S and a capital F will actually return a positive hit for the sci-fi genre now, because that is now a keyword type. Now in contrast, the title, we still want relevancy scoring on title searches. So we're going to define that as a text field, meaning that it can do partial matches and return results in order of relevancy that might not be an exact match. And furthermore, we can define an analyzer that is language specific. So let's say it's the English language that we are assuming our titles are in. The real world, you could have foreign films, and that might not always be the right thing to do, but just for illustrative purposes, we'll do this. And that means that English language specific things like how words are stemmed or how synonyms are applied can be applied to searches on the title field. Now we just need to close off all those brackets. 1, 2, 3, 4. Close off the quote. And sure enough, it worked. Came back with a true acknowledgement. Everything looks good. So now we can re-import the movies data, thusly, curl-x put 127.0.0.1:9200/_bulk question pretty data-binary at movies.json. Cool. All right, so those are all re-indexed with our new mapping. So at this point, we should have an English analyzer being applied to the titles and no analyzer at all for the genre. So let's see how the behavior changes now. Let's actually do that same query we did before for sci. Curl xget 127.0.0.1:9200 movies movie search pretty -d quote. We'll set up a query thusly. We're going to search for the genre sci like we did before. And this time it doesn't return anything because we did not analyze the genre field at all. Nothing but an exact match is going to work now, which is kind of what we wanted. You know, the side genre doesn't exist, so why should I get results for that? Let's try making that sci-fi instead. Just hit the up arrow and going back here. Hey, that didn't work either. Why is that? Well, remember, it has to be an exact match. Even lowercasing isn't getting applied because there's no analyzer at all. What I need to search for is actually sci-fi with the proper capitalization. And now I get some results back. So there you have the behavior of a non-analyzed field. Sometimes it's what you want, sometimes it isn't. So the thing to keep in mind is that when you're dealing with full text data, you don't always want to be doing full text searches on text data. Some strings just aren't meant to be treated that way as sentences or searchable fields. So you have to think about the nature of your data and how you're going to use it when you're setting up these mappings. Let's do another search for Star Wars just for fun. curl-xget 127.0.0.1 9200 movies movie underscore search pretty-d quote, and we'll do a query with a match of title Star Wars. And you can see that we now have an English analyzer applied to the title field. So I'm getting back anything that remotely matches Star Wars because it is an analyzed field. That means I'm getting back Star Trek in addition to Star Wars in my final results here. So that is what I would expect. So I hope that helps you understand how analyzers work. Just to recap again, if you have a text field and you want it to be an exact match only, you should define it as a keyword mapping. Otherwise, define it as a text mapping, in which case it will do partial matches and return results to you based on relevance. You have to think about how these fields are going to be used and what the appropriate behavior is when you're setting up your mapping prior to actually indexing your data. So I hope it all makes a little bit more sense as to how analyzers work now.